Hello everyone, back to finish up Phase 1 and start the next phase of the Monsterverse. Rodan is the second to last movie, and I'd hoped to end it with Mothra. So let's jump into my Rodan fan-made outline. This takes place after the events of Godzilla vs. Kong, and is before the events of my Godzilla 3 outline. We start with Brooks and Monarch heading up the team monitoring the new island in which Rodan has chosen to hibernate in Fiji. Little to Rodan and Monarch's knowledge, there is a local cave that leads to Rodan's current resting place. A shrine built for redemption. In the local lore, the cave belonged to a creature of chaos, a bringer of pollution named Hedorah. Though the creature has been long lost, supposedly buried in the cave, where Rodan now resides. This volcano is long dormant, but is home to many people. The people are reassured by Monarch that they are relatively safe from Rodan, and begin to extract protocols to evacuate the population in case Rodan wakes and flies overhead. During the building process, shelters are built with a tunnel system that leads into an underground docking station. Brooks, another Monarch cameo appearance, is stopped by to check in on progress as we learn that public shelters are being built all around the world. We dive deep to see Rodan wake inside the cave and raise his head and move around to adjust his sleeping position. We pan back as the island gives a slight rumble and the people panic. Here we go back to Brooks, who contacts the outpost on Rodan's intent. He is told that he was just adjusting and getting comfortable, to which Brooks begins to tell everyone that it was just a slight disturbance and the people start to become more welcoming to Monarch's presence. During all these events, we are introduced to an orphan boy who is being introduced to his orphanage. He is met by an orphanage director who tells him that his family left him with very little. As we get to see him settle into his new home, an older girl tries to become like an older sister to him, and we see them look out for each other during the Rodan false alarm. We are also introduced to her wacky friends, two other girls and another boy who they tend to tease. It is one day the children of the orphanage are on a field trip to Monarch Outpost in the public area for all to learn about the kaiju and Rodan. Some of the kids manage to sneak off as the orphan boy is told to go along by the older girl. They manage to sneak by and run into the forest towards the Rodan cave. They are caught on cam by Monarch, and Brooks organizes a team to retrieve the kids and return them to the tour. The kids find the cave and see the entrance is sealed. The older girl informs the group of kids of an older entrance her brother used to take her before he passed away, unknown to Monarch behind lots of foliage. They make their way as some of the kids begin to hesitate. She convinces them that it's safe as long as they are quiet. She leads the way as the younger orphan boy follows. The other kids then follow. As they make their way into a bigger cavern, they begin to hear rumbling, which is of Rodan breathing. Inside are markings on the wall, where they see another creature painted in black. The older girl begins to explain how, in the volcano, a creature who supposedly was made up of smog wreaked havoc with three other kaiju similar to the four horsemen tales, though not all at once. There are other apocalyptic kaiju displayed. We see markings representing Ghidorah, known as War. We see the Muto Prime as Pestilence and Hedorah as Famine. When the boy asks where the fourth one is, she says it's next to Hedorah's markings. She brings a flashlight closer and they see a brown image behind Hedorah. The image looks like that of the legend of Cthulhu. He is the embodiment of death. These kids are in awe and they ask about the two other legends. She tells them of Hedorah being buried after a massive fight against Dagon, long before Ghidorah or the Mutos. They ask if other kaiju are still in the cave as the kids start to become scared, to which the girl describes being exiled into the core of the earth by Kronos, and Muto Prime along with Ghidorah already gone. It is here the staff of Monarch find the kids. They scatter in fear as most kids are grabbed. The older girl grabs the younger boy and both run deeper into the cave. She tells the boy she is taking him to the shrine her brother and her built for their mom and dad. And in a few minutes through the cave system they come to an opening, and outside the opening into a larger cavern. They find an old shrine where there are images of her family together, to which she grabs. Tears start to stream down her face. The boy tries to comfort her as they hear a deep whisper telling him to go away. The girl stands from the shrine and yells out, "Who's there?" Here's when Monarch's team catches up to them and returns the children after reporting the whisper they heard. They are reprimanded and the girl is reminded she is being released the next week for her 18th birthday. The girl the next week turns of age and the orphanage releases her, with her saying goodbye to the little boy, telling him to stay out of trouble. She also tells him that she will try to come back for him if she can find a good job and a cheap place to stay. To which we see her starting a new job. Alan Jonah is found sitting at a table she is serving as a waitress. He asks her to sit down and asks her if it's true she was able to communicate to kaiju, to which she says she's uncertain. He then offers her work with more pay than she will receive here as a waitress. Before she answers, we pan back to the Monarch base, receiving reports of some oil being spilt outside the city. We follow Jonah into one of the newly built facilities, being escorted by some of the Monarch infiltrators, being granted access as we become aware of their plot to wake the buried beast Hedorah. The orphan girl, now part of Jonah Allen's team, is introduced to a Titan Whisperer. They plan to find Hedorah and gain access to the Inner Earth, while training the new Titan Whisperer to her max potential. We pan back to the orphan child who is crying in his bed quietly, mourning his parents when he hears the voice again. Rodan whispers to the boy, asking why he cries. The boy, shocked, asks who it was, to which Rodan shows the image of itself resting in the heat of the volcano. The boy, stunned, says, "You are Rodan." Here's where we begin to learn that Rodan somehow connected to the boy, and he has been hearing many of his thoughts on and off, and finally became curious enough about the boy. Monarch Fiji base informs Brooks of unusual frequency being subtly transmitted by Rodan, and they begin to document it as time progresses. They look on the map of a nearby town of Suva and locate the orphanage. Brooke begins to call Chen, alerting them that a Titan Whisperer may be of the orphanage, to which she says to monitor the orphanage in case a potential orphan could give them insight on what Rodan is saying. And it is right here I'll mark about halfway into the film, just about. Anywho, the small talks with Rodan continue with the child as Brooks receives word to head to South Japan to Mount Aso. He leaves the security chief on hand with other Monarch staff. In South Japan, Brooks meet up with the new head of Japanese-directed Monarch branch. There we hear the conversation include background events outside of the main story, where we learn Godzilla has found his new home and has entered deep hibernation, while Mothra is also incubating in an egg. Then returns to the topic as to why he was called to Japan. They mention that there was a cave in the mountain. They believe another Rodan is living in the mountain, as some fighting was reported, smaller flying creatures similar to Kamazats inside of a cavern of the mountain. They begin to evacuate the area as the new Rodan kills the last of the Bat Kaiju inside. The earth begins to shake as Rodan breaks out of the mountain. Here we pan back to the orphan child speaking to the whispering original Rodan. We found out that this Rodan is female, and that the male Rodan is now coming to nest. During this conversation, the sirens in the city roar as everyone heads to the underground Monarch-built shelters. It is during this incident that Jonah and Alan's group, using the chaos in the cities around the island, to infiltrate into the mountain of Fiji. He asks his new Titan Whisperer if there is anything to be expected, to which he suggests another Rodan is coming to the island. They figure they have an hour to set up and blow the chamber below the current residing Rodan's nest. They are attempting to gain access to a supposed long-buried entrance to the underworld. We pan back to the boy as he begins to hear bat creatures whispering amongst themselves, communicating with an unheard voice. As the kids are being led to one of the shelters, the boy hears the whispers of Rodan asking what the sirens mean. The boy tells Rodan that something is coming here. She tells the boy that it is time of nesting and her mate has heard her call. The boy tells her that the bat creatures are following. By now, Rodan has become concerned for the child and begins to leave the nest to be with her mate, who is being chased by these Kamazats-type kaijus. She tells him to get into the shelter and that the land might ignite with fire. Meanwhile, back on Monarch's Fiji base, we see the acting leads prepare the defense and the base, while calling in support from the Argo. We zoom to the male Rodan arriving to the island as the bats begin their attack on Rodan. Female Rodan comes out of the nest and joins the fight with the giant bats. Here, Jonah Allen detonates the nest's foundation. They continue to seek, but find that it is a dead end and is the remnants of a large explosion that happened long ago. There are ancient scriptures that only say one thing: do not disturb the god of pollution. It is here that the bats take the fight to the towns, and Rodan's heat is just too hot, and the island begins to burn. The smoke from the inner explosion fills the cavern walls as the walls start to collect moisture. Jonah Allen abandons his quest, though his Titan Whisperer begins to have a terrible feeling. They leave with no issues as the island is set ablaze. The bats are destroyed, but the smoke engulfs the island, providing an escape for Jonah Allen. The Rodans decide to nest nearby in New Zealand. The orphan boy hears the Rodan whisper a last time and apologizes for destroying his home, and that they are moving to a place far away from cities to nest and hibernate. As the smoke fills the mountain on Fiji, we see Hedorah start to form inside and begin to grow in strength. Monarch Fiji operations clear the fires. The people are resting safely in the underground shelters as the new supercarrier heads over to pick up the people to move them. The orphan boy starts to have a nightmare of Hedorah, which craves on the smoke. The boy wakes and tries to warn the security about a monster coming. Brooks and top Fiji Monarch staff come to question the boy. Brooks reaches out to Chen, indicating that they've located the Titan Whisperer and that it is indeed a child. After investigating, Brooks calls to all Monarch leads in a meeting, telling them that Hedorah is waking, asking for any details on the matter, to which the security head mentions his people's prophecy of the monster of chaos who thrives from destruction. Here's when the island begins to rumble and Hedorah wakes and floats out of the mountain, consuming the smog and the dying fires. Hedorah pulls all the burnt trees, and the people begin to evacuate on all local boats available. As the supercarrier arrives, Mechagodzilla moves to combat Hedorah as the people are evacuated onto the carrier. The fight begins with Mechagodzilla shooting into the smog monster as it only seems to get stronger and bigger. The boy calls to Rodan asking for help against Hedorah. Rodan then returns for the boy. Rodan says that both of the Rodans will try to do what they can, but the one who originally beat Hedorah was Gaia, an ancient Mothra. The battle between Mechagodzilla at this point is to buy time to get people to safety until the Rodans arrive. We then have a huge fight in the twilight hours as Mechagodzilla is unable to do any sort of damage. As the Rodans arrive, Mechagodzilla is called back to the supercarriers. The Rodans shoot fire out of their beaks to try to burn Hedorah, only turn it into more of a smog consciousness. It begins to suffocate everything in its surrounding and grabs hold of the male Rodan. It suffocates him and kills him. His body falls into the water. Female Rodan begins fleeing as Hedorah gives chase. The Argo arrives with extra firepower, though now they are switching their weapons to a new bioweapon. Hedorah grabs the jets and absorbs it into its mass. The bioweapon begins to take effect as solidity begins to dissipate, with solid pieces falling into the ocean. Though now the new problem is that it's still gaseous. Hedorah chases the Argo, seeking to consume it, where Rodan arrives and begins to thunderclap, sending Hedorah to be pushed down towards the ocean. As the remaining organic matter of Hedorah touches the water, it begins to fall apart. Rodan begins to swoop continuously low and thunderclap Hedorah as its gas begins to dissipate. At its core is a series of plants and trees, with a giant tree at its core. It falls into the ocean and unravels. It is here where Rodan picks apart the final pieces of Hedorah. The battle is now won. The boy waves to Rodan as she returns to her nest, saddened by the loss of her mate. Here we see the aftereffects of the battle, and we conclude with the core Monarch leads briefing the events and suggesting Rodan has laid eggs in the new nest. The orphanage is moved to New Zealand while Fiji undergoes reconstruction, with the city of Suva being the start. They finish their brief about the slumbering Godzilla and that Mothra will soon wake. Here's where I end the movie, setting up for the Mothra movie. And here's a new segment I figured I'd add onto this outline, the post-outline notes. So I wanted to have a bit more drama to introduce Titan Whisperers as the new focus, and enough action-packed kaiju fights as the other Monsterverse movies. I also wanted to re-include Jonah Allen to have a little bit more presence in this movie. I didn't want to go further into detail on the fights, as I am a little bit over time, but I'd love to do at least 20 to 40 minutes of fighting between the kaijus, including the Bat Kaiju fights. And before I forget, there are some plot holes, I know. I do want to imply that the girl can hear Rodan whisper to the orphan boy, but to her it sounds like the whispers are coming from next door because it's not focused on her. The other one I can think of is why Rodan chose the boy over the girl. The boy is praying and calling out, whereas the older girl is independent and concentrating on building her life from scratch. My next film is Mothra, which takes place right after Rodan and before Godzilla 3, King of the Earth. Between my Godzilla vs. Kong outline, I have Godzilla pretty much hibernating until Godzilla 3, King of the Earth. After Mothra, I plan on writing Jaeger's outline with a Jet Jaguar main protagonist and finishing this arc. I'll have a Gamera as the prequel to the events to come to Monster Island, which happens at the same time as Godzilla vs. Kong. And actually, I might push the Jaeger's movie after Gamera. And this will start Phase 2. I went with my current setup from past outlines and then mixed in parts from the original Rodan movie and gave it a more modernized touch. Please let me know what you thought of this movie. Do you like my direction in the outlines? Do you like that I'm including all these crossovers in the series? What would you change? Anywho, this is Lord Commander Guts, aka Mike G, signing off.